بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. This is our fourth lesson on the heart. Tonight I want to talk about the genesis of action. How the heart produces action. And how the heart in that process makes the transition from what is involuntary and therefore something that you're not responsible for to something which is voluntary and something that you are responsible for. So that's what we'll talk about tonight, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And this is one of the most important things that pertains to the heart and our relationships to our hearts, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Imam al-Ghazali, when he talks about this, he chooses to cite an interesting hadith: لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ خَيْرًا مِنْ أَلْفٍ مِثْلِهِ إِلَّا الْإِنسَانَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. There is nothing that is better than 1,000 of its own kind except for the believing human being, except for the believer. لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ خَيْرًا مِنْ أَلْفٍ مِثْلِهِ إِلَّا الْإِنسَانَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. And what Imam al-Ghazali says with regard to this hadith is that this is the case when the believing human being becomes conscious of their hearts and are able to develop their hearts and to purify their hearts and to win this contest. And then that believing human being is better than 1,000 others. In fact, we could probably say thousands of others, because most human beings simply never go there. They never understand their hearts, they never try to understand their hearts, and they go through their lives with all sorts of contradictions and all sorts of confusions. So we'll have that hadith in mind tonight as we talk about the heart and the genesis of action. Where do our actions come from? Imam al-Ghazali stresses to us that the heart is a place of drama. There are all kinds of things going in your heart. And this is true of the sane and sound human being. So often we think of our hearts, we think of our internal emotions as the most private and the most secure part of ourselves. What is more authentic than the thoughts I feel? What is more true than the dream that I see? And this is one of the things that we have to understand is a fallacy. Because your heart is continually open to influences from the outside. Your sane heart is open to that. And this is why you've got to be able to analyze your heart. And you've got to be able to evaluate what is going on in it. And you cannot just accept everything that it gives you as beyond question. And we can bring in here the issue of dreams as well. So people see dreams and they think that this is true because I saw it in a dream. Well, it's no more true than anything else that happens to your heart. And for the dream to be a valid indication of truth, then you've got to know that it is an authentic dream, that it is an angelic dream or a divinely inspired dream, that it's not demonic, that it's not satanic, and that it's not just something that's arising out of the ego. And therefore, when we talk about our dreams, one of the first things is, where did you get that dream? Where did it come from? And most of us would never ask that question. I saw a dream about so-and-so, so what does it mean? But maybe it means nothing at all. Maybe it is completely misleading. Were you in a state of wudu when you went to sleep? Did you overeat when you slept? There are all sorts of things that can influence that dream. And although we're not here to talk about dreams tonight, but if you want to impoverish yourself, if you want to ruin yourself, if you want to flirt with insanity, then live in the world of dreams. As beautiful as they may be, that's not where we're supposed to live. And there are people who have incredible dreams, and they are given knowledge through those dreams and insights. But these people know exactly what they're doing, and they don't attach to those dreams either. And usually they don't believe anything that they see until they know that they went to bed in the right condition, they saw it at the right time, and they saw it repeatedly, not just once or twice. So we have to understand that our hearts are open to all sorts of influences. And when we talk about the symbolic and archetypical world, which is something that is part of our tradition, although you don't have to believe in that, and you don't have to go there if you don't want to. But often we say that the heart has its prototype in the Kaaba. The heart is like the Kaaba. And we say the Kaaba is like the throne of God. Now, the Kaaba has people and beings going around it all the time. And some of those are the best believers on the face of the earth. And some of those, even though you and I wouldn't know that, are angelic. And some of those are people just like ordinary people, talking on their cell phones, thinking about other things, not paying much attention to what they're doing, quite heedless in many cases. And some of them are actually hypocrites. And some of them may even be demonic. Although when we go around the Kaaba, we have a good opinion of our brothers and sisters that are there. But the human heart is like that too. That we have influences doing tawaf around our hearts. And some of them are divine inspirations. And some of them are angelic and pure. And some of them arise from the highest dimensions of the human identity, the pure intellect, the polished soul. And some of them are demonic. And some of them come from the lower ego. So it's very important then to wake up to this drama and not to take for granted what is going on in your heart. In fact, if we look at people that are psychotic, they often have this characteristic of believing and doing whatever is in their heart. And sometimes it's very clearly satanic, especially to the psychiatrist or the psychologist that works with them, that there is a dark force there that has taken them over and that makes them feel things about themselves and about others, and maybe feels them compelled to do something. So this is very, very important, to be attentive to your heart and to judge your heart. Akdhabul hadithi, hadithun nafs. The most lying form of speech is the chatter of the self, the discourse of the ego. So don't believe that. And so here Imam al-Ghazali then wants to talk about khawatir, which we can call in English suggestions. The khatira, the khawatir. They are suggestions, and if you like, we could call them involuntary suggestions, because they are things that occur to our hearts without our having asked for them, and without our having a role in their acquisition. And sometimes these khawatir are really ugly. In fact, they're so ugly that they embarrass us. We can't even talk about them. And sometimes these khawatir are very beautiful. But this is part of the human test. And it is something that pertains to the nature of the way that God put us in this world and challenged us to be as good as we are. And in order to succeed in this area, then we've got to learn to observe our hearts. And we've got to wake up to that inner drama. And we've got to be people who are able to figure it out, what is going on there. And essentially there are two types of influence. There are those that are good. And these we can categorize under the heading of ilham. Ilham, inspiration, in Arabic is always good. And ilham is essentially angelic. And one of the ways that you know that what is coming to your heart is ilham is to look at the consequences of it if you were to do it. So that which is good, that is ilham, coming from the angelic or coming from that which is good in us, one of its marks will be that if you were to do this thing, you would expect its consequences to be good, not to be harmful. And especially, you would expect its consequences to be good for you in the next world. Inshallah, they will be good for you in this world as well. But most importantly, they will be good for you in the next world. They will make you a better believer. They will make you a better person. They will enable you to live your life better. So this is a good thing. And those are the ones that we care about. Are they angelic? Are they from the intellect? Are they from you and the better aspect of your soul? Are they from God? That's sort of irrelevant. It's sort of irrelevant because the main thing is, are they good? And if they are good, then you want to pay attention to them. And then you will get more of them. And then we have bad influences. And we could classify those under the topic of waswas, insinuations, satanic suggestions. And waswas is essentially demonic, but it is not necessarily that way. It can also be from the psyche, it can also be psychotic, it can also be from other sources perhaps. But the main thing here is that is essentially irrelevant. The mark of the bad influence is what? Its consequences will not be good. So it invites us to things. It incites us to things. It puts images in front of us. But if we were to do those, we will get in trouble. We're very likely to get in trouble. And no doubt that could be here in this world. And most important of all, it would be that way in the hereafter. And this is why also everything has to be judged by the Sharia. Everything has to be judged by the Kitab and the Sunnah. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani would say, may Allah be pleased with him, that I hear a brilliant insight of the people of God, and I think about it for days, but I do not accept it until I have two witnesses, the Kitab and the Sunnah. Then I know this is true. And this is why we cannot have a spiritual, ruhani life, an illuminated life of knowing ultimate truths, until we also are rooted in the Sharia, so that we know that certain things are good, certain things are proper, and other things are not. And we will then live according to the things that are good and proper, and we will carefully avoid the others. And when we do that, then you are purifying your heart. Then you are, by that very evaluation, cutting off your heart from the bad influences, because you won't pay attention to them. Like, I'm not going there. I'm not doing that. And always you remember what we said before when we talked about anger, that what is the divine wisdom in anger? You were created with anger in you. But why? Because it is that fundamental intuition and that fundamental reaction, the basic purpose of which is to identify harm and to repel it. Of course, anger can only do that as we grow older if we channel it properly and if we develop it properly. But that's why it's there, because as we said, Darul Mafasid muqaddamun ala jalb al-masalih. The repelling of harms takes priority over the acquisition of goods, of things that are good. So the same thing here, that we don't want to take chances. Man khatara wa salim, ka'annahu lam yaslam. This is what the Arabs say. Whoever takes chances and comes out all right, it's as if he didn't come out all right. What does that mean? I mean, we're not supposed to take chances. It's not wise to take chances. Sometimes we do, as a part of normal life. But in general, the person that takes chances, and then he or she comes out all right, they didn't come out all right, because now they are training themselves to take chances. And sooner or later, they're going to get hurt. So we don't take chances. We pay attention to the consequences. We do things carefully, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So Imam al-Ghazali then, he talks to us about the heart and about how it works, and how we relate to these suggestions that come to the heart. And he says here that involuntary suggestions, khawatir, these things that come into our hearts, they are good and bad, as we said. But also they are suggestions that are tied to tawfiq. They are ones that come from tawfiq. They come from divine assistance. And therefore they bring us ultimate success. Those are, of course, the ones that are good, the ones that are angelic, the ones that are divine. So they are among the most manifest examples of tawfiq in your own heart. This is tawfiq. When Allah gives you the desire to do something good, to be someone good, to help other people, this is the sign of tawfiq. And Imam al-Ghazali says, this is all min ifadat al-ilm. It is the way that God pours out on your heart knowledge, true knowledge about reality, about people, about things to do. And it is also the door of al-kashf al-haqiqi, of the unveiling of the things that are truly of value in life. And so it's a good thing. And again, this is all classified under what we called what? Ilham. The good inspirations. The good or angelic inspirations. Whereas those influences that come into the heart, which are not good, these are demonic, satanic, psychic, psychotic, whatever they might be, but they are examples of khidlan. And khidlan in Arabic is the opposite of tawfiq. Tawfiq is divine assistance. Tawfiq is that quality when God facilitates for you the way to ultimate good and to ultimate success. Whereas khidlan is abandonment. It is when God leaves us. And in leaving us, then He entrusts us to ourselves. And that's not where you or I want to be. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be makhdula. You don't want to be matruka. You want to have tawfiq. And again, you've got to pay attention to your heart if you're going to get there. And if you obey everything that occurs to your heart, and you make no distinctions between the things that are good or the things that are bad, you will be in khidlan. You will be in the reality of abandonment, far from God and far from tawfiq. And all of this also is something that leads to what we call ighwa. Ighwa in Arabic is associated, of course, with ghay. And ghay is always ignorance. It's always poor judgment, ignorant judgment. And ighwa is when we are put in a position where we accept that. We submit to that ighwa. We submit to that delusion or misguidance. So, let me see here if I'm in the right place at the right time. Okay, so in any case, Imam al-Ghazali, when he's telling us about the way the heart works and how the khawatir come to it, then he says that there are essentially 4 stages here. And perhaps that's the most important thing for us to talk about this evening. So, the first of these is the reception of the khatir, the reception of the involuntary suggestion that comes to your heart, and the hadithun nafs, the discourse that your ego is giving you. Okay, now as we said before, the khatir that comes to you can be abominable. It can be frightening. It can be evil beyond words. Okay, but are you responsible for having it? Are you guilty because you had it? Are you an evil person because you had that? What's the answer? No, because it is involuntary. Involuntary in English means it is not a product of your irada. It is not a product of your will. It is a test. And no doubt, if it's really ugly, then it's demonic, or it's psychic, or psychotic. And you want to be able to find out, where is it getting into my house? If you've got mosquitoes in your house, there must be a place that they're coming in. Maybe there's a screen that has a hole in it. Maybe there's a door that's open or something else. But if I have mosquitoes in my house, then I want to find out, where are they getting in? And so we also want to know the same thing, that where are these thoughts coming from? And how can I stop that? How can I close that door? But still, it's very important. You don't judge yourself negatively because you receive this khatir, because it's just a test, and it does not mean that you are bad. Just as if the khatir comes and the khatir is beautiful, it does not mean that you are good. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to respond to it? So all of this is at the level of the involuntary. That which is not a matter of choice. That which is not a matter of irada. And I don't think that we could stress this too much, because it's so typical of us, especially the more sincere among us and the more humble among us, that they judge themselves severely on the basis of every ugly thing that goes across their heart, even though they're innocent. They don't have anything to do with that. So this is also part of knowledge, and this is part of the purification of the heart, and this is part of escaping from the shubuhat, the fallacies that destroy the heart, that you're all right, don't worry. And inshallah, there are things we can do so that this doesn't happen so much. And maybe there are things that we can do so that it doesn't happen at all, but you are still good. And you are not guilty of anything. And of course, when that khatir is ugly and evil, then you have to deny it. And you have to say, this is wrong. People who get depressed have khawatir that make them depressed. And these khawatirs are usually nothing but lies. You are a good person. How did you forget that? Look at all the things you do. Look at how wonderful you are. Look at all the people that you help. Look at the potential that you have. And yet we forget it totally, don't we? We do. And then these khawatir come to us that you're nothing. You are a failure. You know, you are a fraud. You are a hypocrite. You are this, you are that. Okay? And you must not believe that. You must not believe that. Hadithun nafsi akdhabul hadith. So you say, kadhab. You're a liar. And this is what you've got to do. I reject this. I do not believe that. And again, how can you do that when this is something in you? There's nothing more private than this. And as I said before, we think of this as the most intimate part of ourselves, the most authentic part of ourselves. We live in the age of what young people call authenticity. God guide them. You have to be authentic, right? You have to be authentic. There's nothing more inauthentic, than the thoughts that go across your heart. And again, we said the dreams as well. They say that once there was a murid who went to a great sheikh to get tarbiyah. And so he had a dream of the sheikh, and he came to the sheikh and he told him, I had a dream of you. I saw you as a pig. The sheikh said, it's all right. It's all right. And then he had another dream. He came back the next day. He said, I saw you as an ape. He said, it's okay, don't worry. And then he came back and he said, I saw you as a dog. And the sheikh said, everything's cool, don't worry. And then he came back and he said, last night I saw you in the most beautiful, radiant image ever. And he said, that's good. He said, the first night, the second night, and the third, you only saw yourself. Because you were seeing reflections of yourself. Okay, and so we have to wake up to these subtleties. We have to wake up to these subtleties bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. But the important thing is that this khatir that comes to you, sometimes it is ugly, sometimes it is beautiful, sometimes it is neutral, sometimes it is nothing. You've got to you've got to evaluate it, and you've got to think about it, and using your intellect and seeing where it goes, you begin to say, where is this coming from? But these khawatir are the springboards of action. So they are very important, because our actions flow naturally from the suggestions that come to our hearts. Okay, and this is why you want to pay a lot of attention to that heart. And don't be heedless. But when it gives you beautiful khawatir, then you should cherish those and make those springboards of action to the greatest that you can possibly do. And when it gives you ugly suggestions, don't have a bad opinion of yourself. You're going to prove to be a hero because you're not going to do that, or a heroine because you're not going to do that thing. But don't think there is something about you perverted, because that's not the case. That's not the case at all, is it? No, that's not the case. صح ولا لا؟ صح ولا لا؟ MashaAllah. So, okay, so these are very important. This is where action begins. The khawatir, the suggestions. But just to repeat what we said now too many times probably, they are not ethical, and they are not unethical. They are not moral, and they are not immoral, even though the thing that you may have thought of is something you would be ashamed to repeat to anyone. Okay? But they're not that way. And okay, so that's stage one, the reception of the suggestion. And stage two is, how do you relate to that suggestion? And we refer to this as your mail, your inclination, or your disinclination. So this is what your heart now is going to do. That you got a suggestion. So are you inclined to do that? Are you disinclined to do that? Do you have a raghbah, or you don't have a raghbah? Do you have a desire? Are you fascinated by that suggestion, or not fascinated by it? So here you can see how action is embryonically being hatched. Because, okay, I got this suggestion, and maybe I'm fascinated by it. If it's a good suggestion, that's all right. If it's a bad one, that's not all right. But even at this point, the action is still not voluntary. It is still involuntary. And therefore, you will not be judged negatively if you find an inclination towards something that you should not be inclined towards. And you will not be judged positively if you have an inclination towards something good, but you still haven't done it. You still haven't decided to do it. But you got the insinuation. You got the suggestion. And now your heart begins to think about, do I like that or do I not like that? Is that somewhere I would like to go? Or is it somewhere I would like not to go? And this is very important. And this is a natural part of the way that the heart works. And again, this is where you are designed to be tested. And so that's what you need to be aware of, that this is a test. So don't take that inclination lightly. If you are inclined towards something good, then be thankful of God and praise Him. And ask for His tawfiq. Ask for His assistance, so that in fact you actually do that thing. And if that inclination is not something good, then turn away from it and seek refuge in God from it, because it bears the banner of irwa, of seduction and deception, and of khidlan, of being abandoned by God. And again, we don't usually do that, do we? We go into some kind of a daydream state, maybe, where we are just sort of like, hey, you know, that might be good. No, I won't do that. That I shouldn't do that. But, you know, wow. You know, so it's like you begin to go into this sort of subconscious state, and you don't want to do that. You want to make it conscious, and you want to wake up. You don't want to be in a dream, and you don't want to be in a daydream. And you want to be actively involved in what your heart is doing, so that you can say that I am inclined toward this, it is something good, and I will do it. Or, I am inclined towards this, but it is not good, it is not from a good source, and I must not do it. Okay, so you have got to wake up to what? In stage 2, you've got to watch the inclination of your heart. And you cannot take that for granted. And you cannot regard that to be something that is insignificant, that you can just do. All of this is what? Coming alive. All of this is awaking to consciousness. So it's very, very important. Okay, so this is the first prelude to action. This is the first prelude to action. Number 3, stage 3, is your heart's initial decision. It's not your heart's decision, but it's your heart's, the initial stages of your heart's decision. And here it's like your heart looking for a hukam. Okay, so what am I going to do? I am inclined to this, or I am disinclined to this. Should I be inclined towards it, or should I be disinclined? And if it's something I should be inclined to, but I'm not, then shouldn't I be inclined towards it? Shouldn't I make myself do it? And if it's something I'm inclined to, but it's not good, then I've got to disincline towards it. So this is a stage which is subtle, and it is a little bit different from the other one. The first one's sort of like an instinctive response, based on you, based on your habits, based on your past, based on your disposition. But now it's like, and so what do I really do? Do I follow that inclination or not? And so this is also involuntary. This is also not voluntary, but that it is the last stage of the involuntary aspect of the heart. So at this point, you are not going to be judged, neither positively or negatively. You know, but you are on now the brink of action. You're on the threshold of intention. And now you are on the threshold of voluntary action, choice, and what we would call theologically kasb and iktisab. The acquisition of the deed, for the better or for the worse. That like, I want this, I want to do this. And again, especially with evil actions, we have to be so careful about the unconscious aspect of them, because it often and this is also psychotic behavior. that we just incline towards that thing as if we turn off our intellects. You know, when people are on the internet and they're going to do something like look at pornography, which is extremely destructive, and pornography leads to all kinds of evils. People have written about that. Even they say that it will lead ultimately to a totalitarian state. That if you want to have political freedom, you cannot have this. And pornography essentially is the degradation of the woman. It's all based on that. Okay? But people, they drift into that, don't they? And unfortunately today, a lot of women do that too. It's not just men who are doing that evil. A lot of women do it as well. But it's like they just sort of drift into that. And that's the way that we are with so many evil things that we do. It's like we're not even thinking. We just do it. And people have bad habits. They might come to you and ask you, help me, I've got this bad habit. Okay? But usually when they do that bad habit, it's like they drift into it. And this is allowing Satan to take you there. And this is because you're not waking up to the process of your heart. That where is your inclination? Where is your disinclination? And what is the judgment of your heart? You can't do this. So you've got to stop it. You've got to not allow it. And you can't just end up there again where you were before. Also drug addiction and things like that, they work like that. The people just drift into that. So we have to be very careful about our hearts. And this is also having a sane heart, not a psychotic heart. Psychotic behavior is almost always like that. The psychotic person goes into a state which is sort of like a daze. And then they do the thing that they do as if they were not even actors in that. Okay, so it's really important there to watch the action be born in your heart. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are only judged by intentions. So you need to be awake in this process. And the more that we can be awake in the process, then the better we become. And the higher the reward is that we reap, and the greater the light that comes with that. Okay, this is the way you want to live. You want to live on the basis of intention. Intention that you are conscious of. Intention that you yourself give birth to. So this is really, really important. So now we are still in this third stage. And this might sound ironic, but we're still at the level of behavior that is neither ethical or unethical. It is neither moral nor immoral, but it's at the threshold. It won't be there for long. And you have got to watch it as it crosses the threshold. Where is it going? And is that a place that you want to go or not? And then you have the birth of action. And this also is where? In the heart. God looks to your heart. He doesn't look to your body. He knows what your body does. And He knows whether you do it right or wrong. But He looks to the heart. And this is when we have azm. We have determination. We have a decisive decision. I am going to do this. I am not going to do that. And again, that's what you've got to have. And as I said before, you don't want to let Satan or the psyche make you drift into things as if you didn't have an intellect, as if you were not mukallaf, as if you were not a sane human being. You have got to wake up. You're not a sleepwalker. You know, you've got to wake up and you've got to exercise your will that I am not going to do that. I'm breaking this habit. I'm breaking this addiction. I'm breaking this habit that I've been doing or whatever. I'm not going to do that again. And of course, we fail over and over again. And one of the most important things about failure is start over. Get back on your feet. Do tawbah. Don't give up. And also seek the company of believers who are good, who have good hearts. Keep their company. They will help you. They will help you, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, even without your asking. Even without their knowing what is going on in you. But just by being with them, it helps. So this is tasmeem. Here we are determined that we are going to do this thing. And this is what we call jazmun niyyah. This is when the intention is made. And again, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. All of you know this hadith and love this hadith and honor this hadith. Actions are only judged by intention. But one of the most important things with regard to the heart is that we actively, consciously make intentions and carry them out. And again, we can be praying Salat al-Dhuhr or Salat al-Asr, and we don't really know if we made the intention or not. Right? These are things that we want to rid ourselves of. And we want to be able to make intentions and to carry them out. And then we become really noble human beings. Again, I want to mention that hadith that we began with. لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ خَيْرًا مِنْ أَلْفٍ مِثْلِهِ إِلَّا الْإِنسَانِ الْمُؤْمِنِ. That there is nothing that is better than 1,000 of its own kind, except for the believing human being. And as you remember, Imam al-Ghazali cites that hadith in this context, because this is when you become better than 1,000 of your kind. When you wake up to your heart, and when you begin to hatch the niyyah, and you knowingly and willingly do that. I got a beautiful suggestion. You got a beautiful suggestion. You incline towards it. That's tawfiq. And then you evaluated it and said that this is something I ought to do. And then you came into the realm of voluntary action with tasmeemul azam and jazmun niyyah, by making a decisive commitment and a clear intention that I am going to do this. I'm going to go visit so-and-so. I'm going to try to fix things between this party and that party. Maybe I have a problem in my family, so I'm going to try to rectify that. I will now go and talk with my cousin or my nephew or my uncle or my aunt or whatever. Okay, how beautiful this is when we can finally make the intention and do it. And isn't that difficult to do? I mean, are we any different from each other? It's difficult for all of us. And that's why we just like things to happen. We like things to come out all right. But we don't like to force ourselves to do something. Like, I have the intention today to study. Like, that's so difficult. It's so unfun. Right? And you probably end up studying anyway, but first you're going to have some snacks, you'll maybe watch some television, you'll do some of this, and then you drift into the study. Okay, so this is action that is of very little moral value. And if we could do that same action with intention, that, I'm going to study, and I'm going to do this properly, and maybe I'll even make dua that God enables me to do it right, and I'm going to do it even though I don't want to do it. Then we become something else. We become men and women of intention. And what do you think is born from that? Himma. Himma. Powerful aspirations. And this is the way that the great awliya are. Among the messengers, the prophets, the companions, the successors. They are people of himma. and their himma attaches to things based on suggestions, based on their inclination towards those suggestions, based on their evaluation of those suggestions, and then based on tasmeem al-azam and jazmun niyyah, and then they do it. This is what we want to be like. This is what we want to strive to be like. And may Allah make that possible. Don't be a sleepwalker in your life. Wake up. Make active decisions. And make yourself do those things. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And in breaking the nafs, one of the surest ways to do that is when you set priorities right and you force yourself to do those priorities that are highest, which could be visiting your mother, or saying a beautiful word to your spouse, or going to see your neighbor or someone who's sick, or studying or doing other things, and then making yourself do that. I made this intention, I'm going to do it. And we don't strip the screw. You know, we don't just think vaguely about how nice it would be to do such and such, but I don't actually do it. So, Imam al-Ghazali then, he talks about these things, and he says that, you know, when you come into that last stage of the actual intention to do the act, then of course now it is an ethical act, or an unethical act, if we have decided to do something we shouldn't do. And it is a moral act, or an immoral act, depending on the evaluation of that act, you know, that we did. And, this is the way that the inclinations of our hearts, the suggestions of our hearts are born. Imam al-Ghazali mentions here the hadith, إِنَّمَا يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ عَلَى نِيَّاتِهِمْ. People shall only be grouped together, you know, when they are joined together on the Day of Judgment according to their intentions. And the hadith is very clear, but maybe you realize how profound that is, because of the fact that the best of us are those people that have the most intentions and the best intentions, and who live by them. And we would agree, I think, that that is really difficult to do. Mostly we live our lives in a sort of uncommitted way. Yeah, I'm going to pray 5 times a day. It's my habit to pray 5 times a day. Inshallah, I will pray on time. But do I have an intention to do that? And am I galvanizing that intention in my heart? Probably not. Because that is too difficult for the ego. That's too difficult for the ego. And do I have an intention to do this or to do that? You know, we talk about all the kind of good things that we can do. Building institutions, taking care of the weak, the poor, teaching, learning, and so forth. And the real handle there that turns all of this into gold is when we can make that the fruit of real intentions, conscious intentions, you know, that we make and we bind ourselves to do. And then as we do it, we try to keep it pure. Okay? So people are gathered together on the Day of Judgment according to their intentions, and without any question, when we will see the greatest of the believers on that day, you will see that these were masters of the heart. And because they were masters of the heart, these are men and women who made conscious intentions, who generated their action in the best possible way, and then they did them. They did that. And the more that we do that, the easier it becomes. And the whole process of getting the heart right And making the heart right is a process of ubudiyah, of turning ourselves into servants of God. So that I'm not a servant of myself. I am not pandering to myself. I am not letting myself just sort of wander about and graze in the meadow even of good deeds. But I'm saying, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do this. Today you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And then you make yourself do it. How difficult that is. I think you know how difficult that is for all of us. And little by little, as Imam Ghazali says, that if you overeat, and of course in those days they would eat a round loaf of bread, like the kind of bread that you produce today in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and so forth, a big piece of bread like that. He said that maybe you eat 2 loaves and you should just eat 1. So how are you going to reduce your consumption to 1 loaf of bread? So he says, take the second loaf and cut it into, let's say, 30 pieces. And, for the days of the month. And then one day eat a loaf and 29 pieces. And the next day eat a loaf of bread and 28 pieces. And the next day eat a loaf of bread and 27. And by the end of the month, or maybe 2 months, eat 1 loaf of bread. Reduce it slowly. We have to go easy on ourselves. The nafs rebels, and it will take vengeance. You made me do this. You made me get up at night. I was sleeping. I was so comfortable. I'm going to get you back, right? That's the way the nafs works. So, we want to go easy on ourselves, but we have to have determination. We've got to have determination and take it easy, go slowly, but go with conviction, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, at-taqwa ha-huna wa ashara ila al-qalb. The Prophet said that taqwa, God consciousness, fear of God, living a responsible life towards God. Where is it? Here, in the heart. This is where it's generated. And this lesson of Imam al-Ghazali is, in my opinion, one of the best expressions of that. This is the inner dynamic of how the heart works. And may we become conscious of this, and may we apply this, with great sincerity and great purity, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Al-birru matma'anna ilayhi al-qalbu wa in aftawka wa aftawk. You know that hadith. That birr, righteousness, is that you feel at peace with in your heart. When your heart is good, you have nafs mutma'inna. Even if the people give you contrary opinions over and over, don't do that. This is not right. This is not wise. So another thing that we talk about here in this regard, then the khawatir, and this is where I would like to go now, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is to talk about the angelic and the demonic worlds and the effect that they have on us. All of you know that we believe in Satan and we believe in the demonic and we believe in angels and the angelic, and we have to believe in that. It's obligatory, because these beliefs are so clearly set forth and so explicit in the Quran and in the authentic hadith that to deny them is to deny the Quran and the explicit hadith. And we live in a world that rarely believes in such things. And in the development of modernism in the West, different stages are passed through. one of the most important stages, which takes place largely in the 18th century, which Europeans will call the Enlightenment, is what is called in German Entzauberung, removing the magic. This is a term of Max Weber, and I don't like the term, but he used it and we often use it. We in English may call it the disenchantment of the world. And I think that we need to have something else, like, maybe you can help me, the denuding of the world, or the stripping of the world bare. I don't know, Sidi Sham, if you can help me, if you have something there. What does that mean? It means that in the course, especially of the 18th century, in the mindset of many Europeans, it is declared unequivocally that nothing is out there but what you can see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. So it's a material world, a physical world, and that's all that is there. As we said before, one of the marks of modernism as it develops over the last 500 years is reductionism. Reductionism. Reducing realities to just a few elements of them. And we see this repeated over and over again. But this is one of the classic examples of reductionism. Do we have theological proof? Do we have psychological proof? Do we have scientific proof that angels don't exist? Or that demons don't exist? Or that God doesn't exist? Absolutely not. But this will be an inclination of the materialist heart. Okay? Okay, so 1 hour is up. Okay. You don't want to ask a question? Okay, so this is just, is nothing but a tendency of the materialist heart. Yes?
I wanted to ask something about God. I don't understand how God knows everything and yet He chose to test Adam for the apple thing.
You hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you before.
So I don't understand how is God all-knowing and yet he knew that Adam would eat the apple.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the thing?
This is one of the most important lessons in theology. This is one of the most critical lessons in theology. And this is what we call al-imanu bil-qadar. This is belief in destiny. And we believe unequivocally that God has infinite absolute knowledge. That before the creation of the heavens and the earth, God knows everything that will be. Even the fact that you'll be sitting here tonight, and you'll be sitting over here tonight, and that you will have on that t-shirt, and that you'll have that bottle of juice in front of you, and all the blades of grass that are here in front of us. That God knew this before the creation of the heavens and the earth. And we refer to this as necessary knowledge, not possible knowledge. It is necessary and absolute. And more than that, God knew all alternative worlds and all alternative realities. So that what if you were sitting in that chair and not the one that you're in? Even though you chose to sit in that chair. Would that affect anything? Would that change anything? God knows all of these things. And His speech speaks about all the things that He knows. So God does not learn, nor does God ever forget. His knowledge is absolute, and in a way that you and I cannot fathom or imagine. And it's also one. This is very important in theology. And in the realm of possible being, which is the realm of creation, God's will determines that things will be as they are, that this grass will be the way it is, this tree will be the way it is, that I will be sitting in this chair, and that I will be feeling the way I feel right now, and I will be speaking the way I'm speaking now. None of that was unknown. None of that is newly disclosed to God. This is what we call irada, of tarjih and takhsis, of the establishment of preponderance and specialization, specification. These are extremely important topics, and they're among the most important things we study. And then God's power, qudra, it brings into being the thing that He willed to be in His infinite knowledge at the time and the place that He willed it to be, exactly as He knew and willed it would be. So that you have on a blue scarf and you have on a white scarf, and you're sitting here and you're sitting there. Okay, this we have to believe. This is tawheed. This is the glorification of God. And of course, the question arises then, how can I act? How can I have something called a choice? And this is one of the most difficult things for human beings to accept. And they have to accept it. This question of free will come up under the caliphate of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Allah be pleased with him. And one of the famous statements that he said when he was asked about free will is al-amru bayn al-baynayn. Or al-amru bayna amrayn. Maybe I got it wrong. Al-amru bayna amrayn. I think I'm not remembering it quite correctly. La jabra wa la tafweed wa la ikraha wa la tasleed. This is a brilliant answer. That the reality of this matter, which is what? Your choice, your free will, is between two extremes. There is no jabr. In other words, you are not predetermined to do something without your own choice, without your own participation in that. Wala tafweed, nor is creation turned over to you. You're not a God. You're not a Lord. You don't make the trees exist or the sun rise. And then also, okay, that's kind of good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also, la ikraha. So you're not forced to do what you don't want to do. Wala tasleed, nor are you empowered. So this is very important theologically, that we understand that we have also knowledge, we have also will, we have also power. Our knowledge, will, and power, they do not enable us to create, but they do enable us to acquire, to do what we call kasb and iktisab, without our being forced to do that. So therefore, all Muslims have believed in what Christians would call free will. We usually call it by other things, ikhtiyar. We call it by choice, we call it choice. And we call it also action. Okay? And in theology, we will give our community and ourselves the vocabulary and the cognitive frames so that we can hold this together, and so that we can see that this is not a contradiction, although it does appear to be that way. And this is why this is an extremely important question. And usually it takes a lot of study before we can come to a full understanding of it. And then as we develop spiritually, then we can see how this works out. But you have to have a very rich view of reality to do that. So we believe that the human being is not constrained to do anything they don't want to do. And as I said before, when one of our sisters asked a question that was similar to this, that when God creates each of us, He creates for us a place in the garden And He creates for each of us a place in the fire. The worst of us, those of us who will go to the lowest part of the fire, they also had a place in the garden, and probably it was very high. Because those same abilities that they abused and misused to become tyrants and to become the worst of people, they could have used to be guides and to be the best of the people. And when we go to the grave, may we all be felicitous. May we have good lives. May we be people of the garden. But if that's the case, the first thing we will be shown in the grave is our place in the fire. That this is where you would have been had you not done what you did, had you not taken the choices that you took. And this is the garden that will be given to you. And those who go to the fire, they're shown, first of all, this is your place in the garden. This was there for you. You could have had this. No one took it away but yourself. You made the choices that led to what you did. And it's very important that God's knowledge of that did not constrain you to do it. You did it of your own choice. This is hard for us to understand. This is maybe impossible for us to understand at this cognitive level. At the spiritual levels, it's not. Then it becomes clear. But they will be shown their place in the garden, and then they're shown their place in the fire. So, in any case, to get back to where we were, it's so important for us to take charge of our hearts. And, to take charge of our intentions. And as I was saying before, that is an act of ubudiyya. That is an act of pure servanthood. If only we could be like that. If only I could be like that. To be a pure servant, a sincere servant. And when you are a pure servant who is not obeying his or her hawa, and not obeying his or her shahwa, and not living in an illusory world of shubuhat and fallacies, then you become free. You become hurr, or you become a hurra. And for us, in our tradition, and this goes back to the pre-Islamic period, the hurr, or the hurra, is the man or woman of principles. Isn't that so? And the hurr is the person who is free because he is not free. Because he or she is bound by principle. They are bound by what is right. They are the servants of God. They are committed by integrity to what is right. And then God sets them free. How does He set them free? My servant does not approach me, as the authentic hadith says, by anything that is more dear to me, more beloved to me, than what I have made obligatory on him or her, to pray 5 times a day, to fast the month of Ramadan, and so forth. And then he, and this applies to women as well, does not continue to draw closer to me by voluntary acts of good until I love him, or until I love her. And what happens when God loves you? Then He sets you free. You become Atiqur Rahman, the emancipated by the one whom the most merciful emancipates. And then I become what? The eye with which He sees, the ear with which He hears, the hand with which He grasps, the foot with which He walks, and in some transmissions, the tongue with which He speaks, the heart with which He thinks and perceives. These are the awliya of Allah. We ask Allah to make us love them, and we ask Allah to let us approach that state. And he or she does not ask me for anything, but I give them. Right? That's freedom. That is freedom. And they are the least free of all people. And for that reason, they are entrusted with this freedom, because they are pure servants of God. وَمَنْ أَذَى لِي وَلِيًّا فَقَدْ أَذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. And whoever abuses one of my awliya, I have declared war against. We are in a very bad situation in the Muslim world today. You could tell me 1,000 things I could never tell you. I live in a safe part of the world, relatively speaking. I don't know what you know. I haven't been through what you've been through. I might read about it in the newspaper. I might hear about it from you. I don't know much about that. But we know our world today is in trouble, isn't it? Isn't it? But then also, how do we deal with the awliya? How do we respect the awliya? Look in the Arab world. Some Arabs do without any question. Some Arabs, understand that. They still keep that alive. But you have others that are making war against wilaya. You can't even talk to them about Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, even though Ibn Taymiyyah was a follower of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and Ibn Qayyim was, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. They don't want to hear anything about this. And what do they do to the tombs of the saints? And what have they done in the past? You think that we will get victory like that? The tomb of Ahmed Zarruq was violated in Libya. This is not what we do. This is not our tradition. This is not our tradition. And these things bring on us the wrath of God. That's why if we want to succeed, we have got to honor the awliya. We have got to be people of adab. We've got to be people, of integrity, of akhlaq, and of respect. And this country is filled with great awliya. You have incredible traditions in this country. You have some of the most brilliant men and women the world has ever seen. We have to respect that. We have to honor that tradition. And when we do that, maybe the doors will be open for us, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. And I personally do not believe that we will ever get anywhere in the present state of affairs. So in any case, Allah give us this hurriyah. And this hurriyah you earn by becoming God's servant. And again, one of the most important ways that we do that, and pray for us all that we can do this. I'm no better than you. Pray for me that I can do this as well. That is to watch how actions are generated in our hearts, and how those actions go from suggestions, to inclinations, to evaluations, that this is something I should do, to determination that I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do it. I'm not going to say that I'm going to do it, but then I don't do it. And that is so hard, because that is ubudiyah. That infringes upon my nafs. That infringes upon my ease and the things that I like to do. It takes me out of that heedlessness. And then when we do that, we become ashabun niyat, the people of intentions. And then, inshallah, we also become the people of ubudiyah. And then maybe we become free, so that you become a hurra, so that he becomes a hurr, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. How are we doing for time?
10 minutes, Sidi, until questions.
10 minutes. So in any case, Imam al-Ghazali then tells us about the angels, and he tells us about the demons. And there's a lot of stuff here to talk about, and I don't think in 10 minutes we're probably going to do that, but we can take some of it. But again, I think the most important thing here is that, we have got to deal with this shorning of reality, as our beautiful brother suggested. When we shear from reality all the ghaib. We are people who believe in the unseen. And not only that, we believe that the unseen dominates the seen. And we do believe in the demonic. We do believe in the angelic. We do believe in God. Carl Jung, he makes a statement that all of the psychological disorders that I've seen in my life can be traced back one way or another to people losing the things they believed in traditionally in a religious worldview. And he talks about, for example, the fact that when people hear thunder, they need to think that it is from God. And the thunder glorifies the praises of God. You need that. It's true. It is true. But he says when people can't do that, when thunder is turned into nothing but a meteorological phenomenon, people get sick. Because our natures are such that we have to believe in that. We had this volcano erupt. How many years ago was it? In Iceland, the unpronounceable volcano. You know, and it filled the sky with ash, and it shut down the airlines. How many people said, like, what did we do to cause this? Because we don't think like that. This is simply a geological phenomenon that has to do with the way that the gases and the fires and the molten lava of the earth work, and something happened and the volcano exploded, and there you are. Can't fly any airplanes. Of course, this volcano also erupted maybe in the 18th century. I know a few hundred years ago. And at that time, the Europeans were all doing Tawbah. Look how foolish they were. No, they weren't foolish. It's true, the Icelandic volcano and any volcano can be described by the geological processes that are going on in the earth. But they are nothing but descriptions. They are not causes. And everything that happens by the will of God and the power of God. And therefore we must understand that these things that happen, they are also rewards and punishments to us for the things that we've done. And this kind of psychology is one that is very difficult for moderns, in fact, virtually impossible. And we have to make sure that we are liberated from that we believe in God, we believe in the angels, we believe in the demonic, we also believe in the power of the good eye of the believer to help you. You know, nadratun minhum takfik. A single glance from them is all you need. And we also believe in things like the evil eye. We believe in things like sorcery. It is real. In fact, sorcery usually comes to dominate societies when religion is in trouble. Some people would say that Egyptian religion was destroyed by sorcery. It wasn't sorcery in the beginning. They would say that about Babylonian religion. They can say that about Greek religion. And when we look at the Muslim world today, we've got a lot of that. If you go to West Africa, you go to India, you go to other countries, it's like this is happening. In Jeddah, you know, they excavated the sea area there to make the Islamic harbor. Because it wasn't there. Jeddah wasn't a harbor before. In fact, the Red Sea has no natural harbor. And they excavated the sea to create the big harbor that they have today. And when they excavated, they found thousands and thousands of bottles, some of them hundreds of years old, that were nothing but sihr. They were filled with different types of sorcery. Okay, so whenever we see that phenomenon, it means that something is wrong with us. The religion is not well, but that is a reality. That is a reality. And these are the things that will all be rejected in the course of the 18th century. So, you know, it's important to believe in that. Imam al-Ghazali then speaks about the angels, and he talks about the fact that you have 160 of them assigned to you, and he talks about the demons and so forth. But I think probably I can't open that chapter right now, because we should probably conclude and see if we can't deal with some of the questions that you have. Okay? Tomorrow, inshallah, we will come back to this topic. That will be our last class, bi'iznillahi ta'ala. And tomorrow we want to talk about character, khuluq. that what is character? How is it related to the heart? And we want to talk about good character and bad character. Again, in the general way that we've been doing, so that hopefully we learn these things and then we can begin to practice them. Okay. So this person's saying, how come we shouldn't take risks? Well, this is the only way to pursue things in every aspect. Isn't safety limiting to our potentials? Don't we take calculated risks with tawakkul? I think that what this person has said is quite reasonable. And we do take calculated risks. We have to do that. But, you know, when I fly on an airplane, I'm taking a calculated risk. When we get in the car, we're taking an uncalculated risk, especially in some of our societies. It's like, just don't look out the window. Right? But the thing is that we don't want to take foolish risks, and we don't take risks lightly. And that's what's meant by al-mukhatara, to do things that are really foolish. And it's true that sometimes people do that. In the history of war, some of the greatest generals are the ones that take big risks. Khalid ibn al-Walid is one of the examples of that. And in fact, Umar reprimanded him because of the risk that he took in the conquest of Iraq. And he, in fact, removed him from his position. But, you know, risks have their places. And, you know, if you're in the world of finance and business, no doubt, you know, you take risks all the time. You can't be an entrepreneur if you don't, according to my very limited knowledge about that. But, of course, you study this really carefully. If you know what you're doing, and then you make the decision that I'm going to do this. And maybe you'll take a loss, and maybe you'll make a fortune. But, you know, so there's always a place for risk that is calculated and good, and done with tawakkul bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But we don't want to take foolish risks.
There was a question on the microphone?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, does someone here want to ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm a bit confused with...
Can you use the microphone? Is it working? It doesn't seem to be.
Now it's working. Yes, now it's working. I think I've come here today as an act of synchronicity, because I really needed to hear what you talked about today, so for this I first thank you. But then I'm a bit confused with the specific point. I believe the big part of surrender is actually accepting whatever may come. So I got a bit confused with the process that you described, the 4 stages that we go through the decision making, or at least when we come to the 4th stage when we can make a decision. How come when something comes across my heart specifically, and maybe I misunderstood that, specifically if it is ilham, and it is something very pleasant, and it's a feeling that probably gives a sense of being alive and growth, I could think that the consequences of acting upon this ilham might be harmful in my very limited insight or my limited knowledge. So I really got a bit confused with this. If you can elaborate, I'd really appreciate it.
I hope I understand what you're asking, and if I don't understand it, then you can help me.
Absolutely.
First of all, you began by saying that you understand that surrender is like accepting reality as it is. Is that what you said in the beginning?
How I see surrender is that sometimes we might be faced with situations
that we must do what?
We sometimes might be faced with situations or events that in our limited view might not come across as pleasant or something that we want, but then eventually we know that God has a plan for us. That's what
I think that we're talking about 2 very different things, and let's see if we can clarify that.
Please.
So first of all, reality as it is, we have to understand it and we have to accept it in a certain way. As Ibn Ata'Allah says, أجهد الناس, how does he say that? من أراد أن يحدث في الوقت غير ما أحدثه الله فيه. How does that go? I know it's not quite like that. But he says that the most ignorant of people are those who would like to see things happen in their time other than what God has willed. So, the reality of the world as it is today, with all the good that is in it and all the bad that is in it, this is what God has ordained, and it is also what our hands have earned. So this we have to accept. And as one of the awliya said, leave the world as it is, because kullun muyassarun lima khuliqa lah. Leave the world as it is, because each person is facilitated to the thing that they were created for. Some people are facilitated to al-yusra. Some people are facilitated to that which is more blessed and beautiful. And some people, as you know, are facilitated to al-usra, that which is more and more difficult, to damnation because of the things they earn. So you think you're going to change that? We want to work in the world dynamically. We want to be keys of good that open up good and locks that lock down evil. But we couldn't do that if we don't accept reality as it is. We can't live in an illusory world. And also, we can't wish that this world were other than it is. If only we were still riding horses. If only we still had carriages. If only we had sailboats on the sea. That would be foolish, isn't it? We live in a world of airplanes and cars and, all these other technologies. And we have to understand that world and we have to live in it. But as this same person said, leave reality as it is, like understand it as God has willed it to be. That's a type of, sanity. But if you find idols in your own heart, smash them to bits. Okay, that's what I've got control over, is my heart. At least I wish I did, and I ought to have. So when we find idols in our hearts, smash them to bits. And so therefore, when we look at our hearts, which is what we're doing, we want to know what goes on in my heart. So that out of what goes on in my heart, I decide to do certain things and not to do other things. Or I end up doing certain things and not doing other things. So here we're talking about choice, right? And the choices I make and you make in the context of this world out here that we have to live with. If we want to change it, we've got to live with it first. We've got to be realistic. We've got to know what's possible and what's not possible. So, ilham is the word that we use for good inspirations. And as I understood from what you said, that maybe you get an ilham of something that is good, but perhaps when you evaluate it, you see that I can't do that. It wouldn't lead to something good. Was that right? Yes. Okay, so that's just perfectly true. This is also the reason why on the spiritual path, you've got to have counsel, you've got to have guidance, you've got to have good company. I might have an ilham, or I might think it's an ilham, that I should go off to the mountains and just study and do dhikr. But then if I look at it, but what happens to my family? What's going to happen to other things? I remember when I came here to Egypt, which was 1973, that was 1974, I really felt like I don't want to go home. I would like to stay here and I'd like to study with traditional scholars and so forth. And there was a particular Egyptian, if I mentioned his name, a lot of you would know him, but I'm not going to mention his name. But he was my friend, and I trusted him a lot, and I told him I would just like to stay here. I was at the University of Chicago. Had finished my first year, and he said, no, you're not going to do that. He said, you will go back to the University of Chicago, finish your PhD, and then he said, after that, you can come to Egypt or wherever you want to go, and you can study with traditional scholars. And in fact, you will be more respected, and it will go faster. If you begin now, it's going to take a long time. They're going to have you start at elementary school. It's going to take a long time. So he says, you go back, finish your degree, get your degree. Then he said, you can come back to the Muslim world and you can get real benefit. I thank him for that advice. I think that was really correct advice. And I often give that to people myself. But here, that desire of mine, was that ilham? What would you say? I would say probably not. It's probably what Ibn Ata'Allah calls ash-shahwatul khafiyya. You see, it is the hidden shahwa, the hidden appetite. And to go back and to get your PhD, that's going to be difficult. There's certain challenges in that. And so, again, a lot of times what may appear as ilham is not. And Satan himself can suggest to you all kinds of good things, but in the end they won't be that way. So I think that in the process of the evaluation, then maybe we can often come up with the answers that are real. Not everything that glitters is gold. Does that help? Yes. Thank you. Okay, back to the written questions. How do we deal with certain Muslims in today's world who refer to Islamic pillars, like praying and the way that we pray, as primitive, and say that you can still be Muslim and develop, quote unquote, enlightened and more advanced ways and still be close to God? There's a lot of fallacies that underlie that kind of a worldview. And I hope that if we were to ask you those, you could probably bring to light some of the ideas here. The idea of primitive, for example. Like, what in the world are you talking about? Primitive. And why would standing in prayer be primitive? Primordial, yes. Primordial, yes. And religion, true religion, prophetic religion, it has in it dynamic aspects that change. And it has in it other aspects that don't change. It has to be that way. This tree, this bush has to be dynamic. If the wind blows hard, it's got to be able to move, otherwise it will be broken. You don't want your ceiling in your house to be dynamic. That would mean your house is going to fall in. You want your ceiling to be fixed and to be permanent. So the religion is like that too. It is like a tree. That the trunk of that tree is solid and it does not move. And the roots of that tree are deeply implanted and they don't move around. And the branches move. The branches are dynamic. This is the way that sound people are. This is the way that sound societies are. This is the way that sound civilizations are. And we receive our religion through the Quran and through the authenticated transmissions of our Prophet in ways that are very, very well known. There's no question about the historical transmission. And As you know, God honored me to come into this religion. I was a Christian, and I was a Lutheran Christian. And I studied the catechism of the Lutheran Church. The catechism are the detailed aqa'id. I knew them by heart. And I was an acolyte. That meant that I put on special clothes, and I went and lit the candles, and then I put out the candles at the end, and I would sit in the back of the church with my father, and also I sang in the choir, and I did other things. I loved the church. Really, I did. And interestingly enough, I would watch the pastor, whom I love very much. He's like the priest or the preacher. We called him pastor. And I would watch him, and I used to feel emptiness in my heart. I'm just like 12 years old or 13 years old. But I would feel emptiness in my heart. And I would look at the pastor, and I would say, but you don't have that in your heart. Because look at you, you're up on the altar, you're giving the sermon, you're doing the sacraments, you're doing all these other things, and I'm sitting back here, and although I kneel on my knees, that's what we did in the Lutheran Church, and I stand up and I sing and I pray, but there's something hollow here. And when I became a Muslim several years later, and I began to do the salat, which is to stand and to bow and to come back up, immediately it's like, this is what I need. This is what I always wanted. And when I did prostration, it's like the hollowness was gone. Honestly and truly, it's like that hollowness was then filled. So we have primordial acts of worship that are perfectly set, with the highest meanings of all. And, the numbers, the standing, the bowing, the standing back up, the prostration, these are extremely meaningful. And many of our scholars write about that. The fasting is extremely meaningful. And I talked about the other night how beneficial fasting is for you. These are not things to be played with. And a person that makes a statement like this, this is essentially kufr, to say that. It's extremely disrespectful. And it shows profound ignorance. And it shows ignorance of the type that we call complex or compound ignorance, which is when we're ignorant and we're ignorant that we're ignorant. And in any case, I remember that when I was first a Muslim, reading about the acts of worship, how we pray, the different kinds of prayers, the rain prayers, the Eid prayers, the funeral prayers, and then the different ways we fast, the pilgrimage, how that works, the umrah, zakat, all of those things, it's just like, look how incredible this is. And look how primordial this is. Look how perfectly adapted this is to our natural self. So there have to be certain things that are unchanging. This is the nature of truth. Religious communities require continuity. They are not religious communities without continuity. And no religious community on the face of God's earth has continuity like yours. Islam is in continuity with the entire universe. With all religions of the past. With everything that is. And our way of prayer is an ancient way. And it is again one that still speaks to us today with the same vitality as it did yesterday. And so we don't scrap these things. And one of the marvels of Islam in the 21st century is that we came out of the 19th and 20th century deeply scarred. Everything was done in the 19th and 20th century to destroy us forever. Those are the most difficult centuries I believe we ever went through. And we talked about this a few nights ago. 1798, when Napoleon comes to Egypt. Okay, this is when the real trouble begins. 1799, the death of Tipu Sultan. After that, it's going to be night, dark night, and difficult tests. And everything will be done to destroy what was there before. And yet, remarkably, we have come into the 21st century with our spiritual technology intact. That's pretty amazing. We still pray the way the Prophet prayed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We still fast the way the Prophet fasted, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We still make pilgrimage the way that he made it, and the way that Abraham made it, and the way that all the prophets made it before. So, and no other religion can say that happened in its case. We got in safe. And we have got to cherish that. You've got to have continuity. There's certain things that don't change. You don't want your ceiling to be moving or the floor underneath you to be dynamic. You want to stay just like you are. Okay? And you've got to have continuity. And then you've got to have also community. And you can't have community without continuity. You've got to have those two together. I hope that will be adequate, for that question. But let's see what else we've got here. How can a person distinguish between getting close to God and having a mental illness, like having dreams, feelings, things, and energies? When we follow our heart, but it drives us to sin, how can we stop the desire? Mental illnesses are psychotic. They pertain to the ego at its lowest level. And they do have similarities with various spiritual states. So, for example, if we talk about psychotic depression, it is somewhat similar to what in the spiritual path is called qabd, which is contraction. And if we talk about the opposite of depression, which is like manic expansion, mania, as some people call it, it does bear certain similarities outwardly to bast, to expansion. But qabd and bast are sane and sound. They are not psychotic, they are spiritual. And depression in the sense that is clinical, and mania in the sense that is clinical, those are not spiritual, they are psychotic. So, can you distinguish between those? Maybe you can. To be able to distinguish by that, you need certain gifts, you need certain training. The spiritual guides, they can do that. They know that this is a spiritual state, and this is a psychotic state. And they may be able to help in both cases. The psychological cases are the more difficult. And you've got to bring the person out of that dark psyche where they're entrapped, and you've got to give them their health back. So there are similarities, but they are very, very different. And you probably all are familiar with the Oriental symbol of the yin and the yang, the male and the female principle, in the circle. And one of them is a black shape, sort of like a comma, and then the other one is a white shape, sort of like a comma. And then in the white one, you have a black dot. And in the black one, you have a white dot. In a way, that's like a symbol of qabd and bast also. Because in the spiritual state of a bast or of qabd, that although the person in expansion is very happy and very light, ecstatic, they have in themselves that dark spot of qab. Okay, and they have to hold on to that. They have to hold on to that. That's their staff. So that in the state of ecstasy, they don't go crazy. And they're able to hold it. And they're able to hide it. And they're able to hold their tongue. And as they develop spiritually, they become more and more able to do that, so that ultimately you wouldn't know that they're in a state of expansion. Okay, because it doesn't affect their outward behavior. They're able to remain balanced and calm. And we say that the awliya of Allah are mountains. And mountains don't move. And mountains don't need anchors. So they're like that. They're very anchored. And they have these incredible spiritual states that go on inside of them. And the same thing in the person, with regard to the person in the state of qab, or contraction, that they're not in a state of depression. Yes, things are very difficult. Things are painful even. There's no joy, there's no ecstasy. But they are worshiping maybe better than ever before. Because they don't worship out of a desire to reap spiritual benefits. They worship simply because this is God's right, and they concentrate on Him. And then they hold to that white dot, which is the staff of bast, so that they still have hope, they still have sanity, they still have goodness, and ultimately you wouldn't even know that they are in a state of qab. I know one of the salihin, that I believe in as a really upright man. And I remember once he told me that last night I had a migraine. And he said I took some medicine, but there's nothing I could do about it, so I just decided to enjoy it. Okay, can you do that? I don't know how to do that myself. But it's just like he then submits to it. You see that God willed this to be, this is very painful, and I accept it. And I'll still worship Him. I will still do whatever I'm supposed to do. So in any case, there are these similarities between spiritual states and between psychological states. And the distinction between them is not correct. But on your way to God, you've got to be sane. And you've got to be on a path that gives you deeper and deeper sanity. And you've got to be very careful that you have good company on that path, and that you have good instruction on that path, and you have good guidance. And again, as we said a few nights ago, the person who harms you more than anyone else is the fraudulent, quote-unquote, spiritual guide. He or she could drive you crazy. Here in Cairo, at Azhar University, there is a scholar, I don't know his name, and I wouldn't tell you if I did, and I hope that I'm not backbiting him by saying this, because some of you may know who he is. But he was a great scholar, and he memorized all kinds of big texts. And then he took a particular man as his sheikh, and he went insane. That shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen. But who is the sheikh then? What kind of credentials does he have? If you can't guide the people to sanity through sanity, then you should get another profession. This is not right. So we seek refuge in God from the people that don't have the credentials they claim to have. And may Allah enable us to take the right path. When we follow our heart, but it drives us to sin, okay, your heart, if you are following the right khawatir, will never drive you to sin. Okay, this is what we're talking about tonight, that you've got to be involved in this process. When the suggestions come to your heart, they're going to be good, they're going to be bad. You've got to weed out the bad. And you can't say, my heart is driving me to that. No, this is your behavior. You've got to evaluate what is going on in your heart. You are not passive. And you've got to say that this is good. So I think I'm going to do it. I'm inclined to do it. Let's do it. And you've got to say that this is bad. And even if I'm inclined to do it, I'm going to disincline myself. And even if I evaluate that, well, I'll do it this time and not do it again, you've got to not do it. Okay, this is you. And you can never, never justify doing what is wrong by saying that my heart made me do it. Okay, it doesn't work like that. That's self-deception. What did we get here? Let's see. What could possibly be the problem if I don't get the feelings I should get while fasting? What are the feelings you should get when you're fasting? Hunger, thirst. Look, if you don't get hungry when you fast, you don't get thirsty when you're fast. You've got it easy. Be thankful. Fast a lot. You know, see, this is the thing, is that when we've got expectations, that when I get up at night to pray, it should be really cool, right? And, you know, I should be in a spiritual ecstasy. And if I don't get it, then I get really sad, right? It's like, what happened? This is New Age spirituality. And indeed, Allah can give you ecstatic emotions. And He can also take them away. These are what we call waridat. These are lights that come to you. And they all have their own purpose. Some of them make you serious. Some of them make you sad. Some of them make you cry. Some of them make you unaware of yourself. Some of them make you ecstatic. Just take them as they come. The warid brings you a gift. And it may not be sweet, it might be bitter. But let it leave that gift and go. And pray because of the fact that this is what pleases God, not because this is what pleases you. And fast because this is what pleases God, not because this is what makes you feel special. Okay, that's really important. Again, we're told the story of a murid who went to a great sheikh. And before he went to the sheikh, he would get up at night, he would pray every night. He was in rapture when he prayed at night. And then he took the hand of his sheikh and he couldn't even get up. And for days and days he couldn't get up. So what does that say about his sheikh? In this case, you've got a real sheikh. Because what did that sheikh do? He popped the ego balloon. Because before that, the person's getting up because he's so inflated. I'm so good, I'm so happy, look at me. And in fact, his reward for that's not going to be very great, if any. In fact, it can even lead to ujub, which is self-satisfaction, vain glory. Okay, so the sheikh popped that, and so like now you get up, it's going to be hard. But go back to sleep. And now if you do get up, inshallah, it will be the real thing. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So often we have these expectations that I do dhikr, I should be ecstatic. In fact, in some countries, it's expected of the imam, after he recites the Quran, that he's rocking back and forth and he's doing these things. If he doesn't do it, people will be upset. Why weren't you rocking? And it's like, I'm not a hypocrite, I didn't feel anything. But it's like, spirituality is much deeper than that. And sometimes our great sheikhs, they say that these ecstasies and so forth that we get when we pray, they're like candy that's given to babies. So you give the baby a rattle and it won't cry. But you, as an abid or an abida, you do this for the sake of Allah, not for your sake. And this is why sometimes, we can look at some of the Sahaba. I remember one of them, whose name I don't remember, but he died in Basra. It's one of the Sahaba, Ridwanullahi alayh. And when he died, he was really sick. And he was in great pain. And he couldn't get up out of bed. He couldn't pray. He couldn't even do imat when he prayed. And, the people would weep when they saw him. He was in such suffering. And then he told them that, why do you cry for me? If you knew the ecstasy I'm in. It's as if I'm being visited by the angels. So I'm in pain, yes, but I'm also in a blissful state that you don't know anything about. And this is also what happens with these people who are truly sincere, that even in the deprivation of pain and health and things like that, they can still do what's right. May Allah make us that way. Oh, it is. Okay, inshallah. So sorry, Mother Teresa. Whoever said that. Maybe we'll come back to it. We have a Mother Teresa question here, but we don't have any more time for Mother Teresa. I'm sorry. Allahumma waffiqna lima tuhibbu wa tardah, waj'alna min 'abidika as-su'ada, wa amitna 'ala kalimati al-huda, 'allimna ma yanfa'una, wa waffiqna lil-'amali bima 'allamtana bih, واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. Thank you again for the honor that you pay us by coming here and sitting with us, and I hope you'll be able to make it tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the last class, and tomorrow inshallah we'll talk about character. That's a very important lesson. It's sort of, and again, these are preludes so that we can then deal with our hearts, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And may all go well with you. Wassalamu alaikum.